Today, I'm going to be reviewing the full lineup of FiR Audio's M-Series IEMs. We're going to start with the M2 that comes in at $800 and work our way up to the M5, which comes in at $2,800. Now, because I'm reviewing 4 IEMs in one video, I'm going to briefly go over the sound and tuning specifications, comfort and isolation of each. So I'm not going to be going in as much detail as I normally do, but I will make sure that I cover all of the important aspects of each IEM. We have a lot of ground to cover, so let's get started. This is Audio In Reviews. So let's talk about the specifications, design, comfort, and isolation of FiR Audio's M-Series IEMs. To save time, what I'm going to do, since I've got 4 IEMs I have to cover here, is we'll go over their similarities first, then we'll go over the individual differences. Let's go ahead and start with the design, because obviously the design is very similar between all 4 of these. The only difference is really being in the color variations between the M2, M3, M4, and M5. The red M5 is my favorite. Now, if you do decide to go with the custom options, of course you have so many possibilities. I think you can actually pick your shell color and do a custom faceplate. So if you do go the custom option, of course, you're going to have, again, many design options. Now, the universal here, again, the design is quite simple, but it's very nice. Now, another thing these all have in common is they use FiR Audio's, I believe they developed this connector themselves. It's called an RCX connector. And it looks like it's just like it's a modified version of an MMCX. So instead of you being able to plug it in and having 360 degrees of turning radius with your IEM, because it has this square base here, it's kind of it locks into place, which I believe is just for better durability, because I know that even with the MMCX cables that I've had in the past, I've had issues with the connection loosening and even getting to the point where it would just fall off. I don't know if the fitting gets bent or what, or misshapen over time, but this one seems like it would just be a little more reliable and just have a little better be a little more durable over time, especially if you're going to be using it on stage. So also what I did was I kind of put this together here. I put the M3 in the case so you can kind of get an idea. First of all, you can see what the case looks like. It's quite a nice case. And the way they have it laid out in the case is there's little holes right here that hold the tips, and then you can put the nozzle of your IEM in the hole right there, and you've got the cable underneath the foam, and that just all fits together very nicely in there. So I imagine that's probably how it would come when you do the unboxing if you were to order these. But it is a nice little case. Now, something else, 3 of these are hybrids, and the M5 is a tribrid. So the M2, M3, and the M4 are hybrids. So they have a combination of BAs with dynamic drivers. Now again, the M5 is a tribrid, so it has a stat tweeter and BAs and a dynamic driver for bass. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about the differences between these individual IEMs. We'll start with the M2. The M2 comes in at $800, has 1 BA driver and 1 dynamic driver. The M3 comes in at $1,200, has 2 BA drivers and 1 dynamic driver. The M4 comes in at $1,899, has 3 BA drivers and 1 dynamic driver. The M5 comes in at $2,799, has 1 electrostat tweeter, 3 BA drivers, and 1 dynamic driver. So as far as comfort and isolation, all of these have a similar shape, and so the fit and comfort was about the same with all of these. The one I spent the most time with was the M5, and when I did my long listening sessions with those, I didn't have any discomfort at all. Now, as far as isolation, these are vented, so there was a little bit of noise bleed through, but it wasn't anything too bad. Okay, so we have a lot more ground to cover, so let's go ahead and move on to the sound. Okay, so before we talk about the sound of each IEM, I briefly want to talk about tuning and usage. Sometimes I think as reviewers we kind of forget about the stage use side of things and focus more on the audiophile side of things. And I get that most reviewers probably do have more of an audiophile background. Mine's kind of both, probably more musician than audiophile. As a matter of fact, my introduction to in-ear monitors was for on stage. So as an on-stage in-ear monitor for live performance. And as a drummer, I looked for tuning, and this is kind of before I was really into it, but generally I would look for tuning a little bit bassier because I wanted to make sure that it was going to represent my kick drum really well, my floor tom, and I wanted to be able to hear the bass player because again, the bass player and I, we kind of make sure since we lay the foundation for the music that we can hear each other. So I wanted to make sure that the IEM was tuned for drums and for bass. So again, that's kind of my background. Now, I know a little bit about FiR Audio. I know that they also have their background when they first started out was kind of the IEMs that they were developing were generally for stage use, for musicians. So I wanted to make sure before I did the review that I did my research on each one of these. And sure enough, when I was reading the description on the website for each IEM, they talk about stage usage. For example, the M2 in the description, it talks about these are suited for use as an IEM for either a guitarist, bass player, or a drummer. And then I read the M3 description that talks about different types of usage as well, and also the M4 and M5. So I thought that was really interesting. I wanted to make sure that I did my research before I reviewed them, and sure enough, they talk about stage use for these IEMs. So the M2 has a V-shaped sound signature, kind of a mild V shape. So you've got the emphasis on bass and emphasis on treble. Now from an audiophile perspective, or from a personal usage listening perspective, we would call that a fun tuning. Again, because you've got that fun bass. Now the bass is elevated, however, it does have good texture, good layering. Then you're moving into the mids. Again, you have the recessed mids. So instruments and vocals generally tend to be kind of pushed far away from you. But there's still a good amount of mids as far as it's not too far away. I think they did an okay job. Then if you're moving into the treble, again, you have the forward treble. So cymbals are accentuated, hi-hats are accentuated, and like the air as far as in like a live performance, live recordings, those sound pretty good. You've got that air, you've got that space, so they have a pretty wide sound stage on these. Now, as far as stage use, I did not get to use these on stage, any of them, because I didn't want to risk. I'm a drummer, I move around a lot, my arms are swinging, I got sticks flying everywhere. I didn't want to risk, because these aren't mine, damaging them. Now, I can kind of look at the tuning and kind of tell what it's going to be like for on-stage use. One thing I can't tell you is how they would work on stage as far as isolation, comfort, the cable and stuff like that. But based on the tuning, seems like these would work. It talks about, again, in the specifications on the website, it says the usage is suited for guitarists, bass players, and drummers. And I can see that. I can see myself with the amount of sub bass and bass emphasis that this has, and treble emphasis. So I would really be able to hear my kick and my floor tom really well, be able to hear the bass player really well. On the high side, I'd be able to hear the detail in my cymbals, the hi-hat, and the snare attack. So just looking at the tuning of these, a V-shaped tuning a lot of times will work well for drums and bass. So yeah, so that covers the basic tuning of the M2. Let's go ahead and move on to the M3. Okay, so let's talk about the sound of the M3. The M3 is what I would describe as a warm sound signature. So you have a little more weight to the notes, but they're not too weighty. The treble balances it out very, very nicely. Overall, the detail and clarity throughout the entire frequency range is really, really good. Again, because you have those weighty notes, you've got the sub bass, bass, and the mid bass, and even the lower mids kind of elevated. And then you do have a slight dip in the mids, but not overly recessed at all. Vocals sound nice and close. Instruments sound very close. It does have a little bit more of an intimate, I'd say probably average sound stage. Some might consider it intimate sound stage. The treble is excellent. The detail is very, very good on these. Hi-hats and cymbals sound really natural. The overall instrument timbre sounds really good. Voices sounded natural. Now, as far as stage use, again, I didn't get to use any of these for stage. This actually says in the description for the M3 that it's more suited for either mixing or audiophiles. I don't have much of a background in mixing, so I can't speak for that. These things sound great. I love the tuning. As a matter of fact, of the four, these and one other one are my two favorites, and we'll go over the other one in just a moment. So, all right, well, that kind of covers the basic tuning and sound of the M3. Let's move on to the M4. Okay, so the M4 has what I would call a bright mid-forward tuning, because you have emphasis, if you look at the graph, on 2.5K, between 2.5K and 5K. So those frequencies are kind of elevated. So what that does is that's going to give you more presence, push vocals and instruments a little more forward. Now, and if you move into the upper treble, it does kind of drop off a little bit past 5K, but you still have plenty of air. So live recordings sound really, really good with the M4. Again, so you've got plenty of air. These have a really, really good sound stage. The instrument placement on these is extremely precise, very, very precise. Now going through the mids are very detailed. Instrument timbre is excellent. Voices sound natural. Mid bass sounds really, really good. So throughout the entire bass frequencies, bass, mid bass, bass, and sub bass, very layered, textured, lots of really good detail. And when I was reading through FiR Audio's website, the description for the M4, it said that it was best suited as far as the stage side of things for vocalists, keyboardists, and guitar players. And I can see that because, again, you have that 2.5 to 5K area that's kind of elevated. So what that does is it pushes instruments and vocals forward. So I can see that working well for vocalists, guitar players, and keyboardists. On the audiophile side, the overall tuning of this, again, is very, very pleasing. If you like a mid-forward, brighter sound, these will be perfect for you. All right, so that covers the M4. Let's move on to the M5. Okay, so I want to spend a little more time on the M5, and not just because it's the flagship, but because it really, really impressed me. When I was talking about the M3, I talked about how that was one of my favorites, and then I had another favorite. Well, the other favorite is the M5. And those are both the warm IEMs. Of the four, the M3 and the M5 are fall in that warm sound signature, and the M5 is the warmest of the two, the M3 and the M5. The M5 is the warmest. Now, if you were to take the M3 graph and lay it right on top of the M5 graph, what you're going to see is a little more mid-bass presence in the M5, a little more sub-bass presence in the M3. And then I did like that extra sub-bass presence in the M3, but the extra bass and mid-bass presence in the M5 was just a little more attractive to me. Now, so that was one thing that drew me more towards the M5 rather. It just had some weightier notes to it, and I really, really liked that. So then if you move up into the upper mids, lower treble, what you're gonna see, if you were to take that M3 graph, lay it right on top of the M5, is between 1K and 4K, a little more presence, about 2 dB more presence in the M3 than you do the M5. So if you were to compare those graphs overall, you're going to see the M5 kind of leaning more to the warm sound. Now, and again, I talked about as a musician, being a drummer, one of the things that I listen for in an IEM is how natural do drums sound. So, and a lot of times I'll listen to, like if I know a certain song has a snare that's tuned a little fatter, a little fuller. A lot of the rock that I listen to has those deeper tuned snares. And if an IEM has a little bit more of a warm sound signature, what it'll do is it'll pull out those low notes that are, because the snare isn't all highs. Sometimes you have that, if you have a deeper tuned snare, you'll have some low notes in there too. And I like an IEM to be able to pull those low notes out of a snare also. So you have the attack when the stick hits that top skin, you have that crack, and then you have those lower tones that can come out of the shell and the bottom head of the snare. So I like to hear that. Also in a tom, a 14 or a floor tom, you've got those deeper tones and warmer kind of tones that come out that I want to hear in an IEM. And sometimes if that mid bass is a little too recessed, I'm not going to be as satisfied with the tone that I'm hearing out of that deep tuned snare or toms, or even like some of the notes in like a bass guitar or an upright bass. Again, talking about stage use, when I was listening to these things, I told you how I did not have I was too afraid to take any of these with me on stage. And I knew there was an opportunity coming up for me to be able to use these. And I really, really wanted to try the M5 on drums. Just because I just knew that I would love these. But at the last minute, I chickened out. Again, I was afraid that something would happen to them. I did not want to risk these not belonging to me. So man, I really wish that I could get my hands on another pair of these at some point so that I could actually try these on stage and do a full stage review. I just really wish I could spend more time with these and put them through their paces, because overall, these things really, really impressed me. So moving on though to the other aspects of these, the M5s, as far as soundstage, imaging, the soundstage on these is really, really wide. Imaging, instrument placement is super, super precise. Again, if you look at the mids and the mid bass, again, you have that warmer tone. Because of the way the mid bass and bass is tuned, you do have the bass is kind of pushing into the lower mids a little bit, and but it's not so much that it takes away from texture and detail. there's still plenty of detail and texture and clarity in the mid-bass, bass, and sub-bass regions of the M5. The mids are very, very clear. Vocals sound warm. Instrument timbre on pianos, trumpets sound really, really natural. And again, moving up into the treble, live recordings have really good air. Cymbals have sizzle. They sound really, really natural. There was almost nothing on the M5 that I did not like. These things from beginning to end were just an absolute pleasure for me to listen to again. So of the 4 IEMs, if I had to choose one, I would definitely pick the M5 out of all 4 of these. So FiR Audio's M Series lineup covers a wide range of tuning preferences, all the way from the M2's V-shaped sound signature to the M5's warm sound signature, and in between you have the M4's mid-forward bright tuning also. So you've got a lot of different sound signatures to choose from, and also different usages from stage use all the way to home use, and a wide range for budget. So if you want to be able to get M Series Performance, you can get M Series Performance for $800. So I think FiR Audio did a great job with their M Series lineup. I want to say thank you to Audio Tiers and FiR Audio for allowing me to participate in this tour. I want to say thank you to all of my subscribers and my new subscribers. Please like and share these videos. Thank you guys so much. I hope you've had a wonderful holiday and have a happy new year. Thank you so much. Have a great day.